Hello, everybody. Happy Dia de los Muertos. Feliz Dia de los Muertos to all of you, as well as Happy Friday. And for those of you that don't know what Dia de los Muertos means, it means Day of the Dead. In honor of that, I have this warm up for us today. So you can either pick the first part to write about or the second part. So the first part says it says write about someone that you knew and has passed away. What made them important to you and how do you honor them? Okay, so think about if you were to add them to my ofrenda over on the corner, what would you want to put there for them? What kinds of things did they like? What made them, stand out when they were alive? And then the second part is if you don't have someone to write about, what would you like to be remembered for when you pass away? What is something that you would like to be included in an ofrenda if somebody was to add you to their altar for Day of the Dead? If you can't answer any of those, then maybe even when you pass away, what kinds of things do you want there to be in your eulogy that somebody might say for you? So go ahead and take about 10 minutes to write about this. A sub will go ahead and pause the video, allow you guys enough time to write, and then you guys can continue with today's assignment as usual. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to a short little intermission in our ethnic studies literature to talk about one of my personal favorites, Edgar Allan Poe. But before we do that, we need to understand what Gothic literature is. So Gothic literature is, not exactly what you think when you think of Gothic. Okay, so usually when we think of Gothic, we think of people who will wear, dark makeup and they have the dark hair and wear really long, like dark robes, and they just wear a lot of black and the Doc Martens, and they might be a little mysterious. But in Gothic literature, it's obviously dark, but there's a lot of romance. But in all of Gothic literature, you'll see gloomy or decaying settings such as haunted houses or really old castles with like secret passageways or like cobwebs all over the place, trap doors, or some kind of mysterious architecture that you can't quite really understand. You will also see things like supernatural beings or monsters such as ghosts, vampires, zombies, and giants. There's usually like a curse or a prophecy, a damsel in distress, so some kind of lady who needs to be saved. There's heroes, there's romance, usually between the damsel in distress and the hero. And then there's also intense emotions. So either somebody is very, very afraid or just so in love or very anxious, very frustrated. There's just a lot of intensity going on. Okay, so that's Gothic literature. And so before I continue, I want you guys to take some notes, if you haven't already done so, on both Gothic literature as well as what I'm about to go through in terms of Edgar Allan Poe and his writing. So as you guys get started with that, I want you guys to think about this question here, because this is the driving question that drove Edgar Allan Poe to pretty much write what he did throughout his life. He was a very mysterious guy, as most of you guys already know, because I know you've all read at least one of his writings. But just think about what scares you the most. Is it something like spiders? If it'll. Okay, come on. Spiders? Come on. Or a snake? Or maybe even like the supernatural, like Freddy Krueger, or some kind of what are they called? Serial killers, and you're afraid of something that's lurking around the corner. Okay? Because for Edgar Allan Poe, okay, and this is something that he said, I became insane with long intervals of horrible insanity. So he knew he was a little crazy, but there was times, long intervals, where he was just very crazy. Okay? But for him, the thing that scared him the most was the death of his one true love, or really of just being alone and not having somebody to love or somebody that loved you back. And I think some of you guys may already know that that happened to him a lot in his life. So the Raven, which we're going to be reading, is loosely based on his own experience. His young wife, Virginia, was dying of tuberculosis, which is an awful illness to die of. If you've ever watched a movie where somebody has like issues with their lungs and they're coughing up blood, that's what tuberculosis is. But while she was dying, he wrote this poem about a man who was haunted by the loss of his love, who he names Lenore in the poem. And so a lot of people think that this poem, The Raven, is loosely based off of his own experience watching his wife die. So, Romanticism is a literary movement that is characterized by a heightened interest in nature, including the wild terrain of the human mind. Okay, so when you think about romantics, you usually think about a lot of love and, maybe a man and a woman or, whatever it is that you may think of. But when we talk about romanticism in terms of a literary movement, this is getting away from like the Puritans who were all about God and it was only about doing right through God. For the Romantics, it became all about nature, who we are as human beings in regards to nature, and what it like all the things that we think about. Okay, so it just became about exploring who we are in the world, not so much about who we are in terms of the Bible and in terms of God. So, the Gothic or the Dark Romantics were a group of Romantic writers, including Poe, who focus on dark elements of the human psyche or the human mind. So, think about things such as depression or addiction or just, really bad thoughts that somebody might have. That's what the Gothic or the Dark Romantics were thinking about, which is how they came up with, all these Gothic literature kind of things. Fear having to do with like a haunted house or, but still being, still having that connection to humanity, to a human being, such as, you would have with love or intense emotions between a damsel in distress and a hero. Okay. And so, whoops, wrong way. And so as we read, or as you guys will read today, I want you to be on the lookout for an illusion, or for illusions, I should say, because there are a lot of them in this poem. An illusion is a reference to another literary or historical work. So we've talked about this before when we talked about sinners in the hands of an angry God, but an allusion is essentially when in that story that you are reading, they talk about another story, or they talk about the Bible or some other God or something. Come on. So be on the lookout for for allusions, for sound devices such as alliteration, repetition, any rhymes, either schematic rhymes, which are at the end of each line, internal rhymes, which are inside each line, and slant rhymes. And then finally, any figurative language such as similes and metaphors. Okay, so this is the start of the poem, okay? You guys each have your own copy, which you're going to be going through yourself. But before I go through the start of the poem with you guys, I want you to go ahead and take a couple minutes to answer these 4 questions. So the first, I'm sorry, not these ones. Not these 4 questions right here. So before you read, what is an alliteration? What is allusion? What are some elements of Gothic literature? And then finally, what are some of the hardest moments that Edgar Allan Poe lived through in his life? Write about at least 2 or more. Okay, so go ahead and answer these questions in your notebook, in your notes section from that you were just writing on just now. And if you're trying to find the answer to number 4 and you don't know it already, you can use your literature book on page 288, which is all about Edgar Allan Poe and his life. Okay, so go ahead and answer those. And then, when you are done answering those 4 questions, I want you to read through The Raven, and you can read through it using the link that I have provided from this version of The Simpsons, Simpsons reading of The Raven, which is actually really, really accurate. So if you watch that one and read along with it, it'll make so much sense because they act it out and it's actually a really great version. But then when you are done reading, I want you to pick 3 consecutive stanzas, which means it should be one stanza or 3 that are together, one after the other. In those 3 stanzas, I want you to count the number of syllables in each line. So you can, clap it out and then count the number of syllables and write that at the end of the line for those 3 stanzas. And then using a highlighter, I want you to highlight any rhymes, either internal or schematic. Schematic means they're at the end of the line. And then circle any allusions. So when it talks about the bust of Pallas, that's an allusion, excuse me. And then finally, underline any alliterations in those 3 stanzas that you picked. And then once you have done that with those 3 stanzas, I want you to turn the paper over and I want you to write or fill in this plot diagram. Okay, so even though it's a poem, this poem is kind of like a story. He tells the story of this guy being tormented by this raven, right? And what this raven is reminding him of. So go ahead and fill in like what's going on, that is the conflict, what's the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and finally, what is the resolution. And in terms of the exposition, make sure you talk about all of these Gothic kind of, what are they called? Gothic elements that you see throughout. Okay? So those are the 3 different things I want to see for today. I want to see, actually 4, your notes, brief notes that you should have taken. I want to answer these 4 questions. I want to see some thoughtful, critical analysis and annotations of your copy of the Raven. And then on the back, you should fill out the plot diagram. And then I'm going to go back to my copy right here. Okay. And so the beginning part of it, it says, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. 'Tis some visitor,' I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, only this and nothing more." So if I was to go through, and nobody can do this stanza now because I'm doing it, but if I was to go through and look for any rhymes, I would see that rapping, tapping, napping, those are all internal rhymes right here. Okay? And then on the end here, lore, door, and more, all these rhyme. Okay? So those are some things that I would make sure that I would annotate. Okay? And then also I would go through, and if I clap it out, I would find out that, so once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary, that's, I believe, 17 syllables. And so I would write the number 17 right next to this line right here, and then do the same thing for each of these lines. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for in terms of your annotations. Okay, so you guys may work together if you want. This is a very awesome poem. It's so beautiful. You can like almost rap it from how beautifully written it is and how much rhyme there is and just how many things you can actually see in your head. So make sure you turn in this assignment into the bin before you leave. I will be coming back to school after I am done with my conference to pick these up so that I can grade them over the weekend. But please be on your best behavior. You guys know what happens if you are not on your best behavior, but I expect nothing but the best from you guys. So I hope you guys have a nice weekend. I'll see you guys on Monday. Bye.